everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to go ahead and talk about dividing decimals. Let's jump right into it. So, here is my anchor chart, and as you can see, I placed it on the right side of the screen so that you guys can see it as you guys are solving. It's super important that you guys are either printing out the anchor chart or writing it down. It will help you when you're actually doing the assignments. So, when you're dividing a decimal by a whole number, the first step you're going to do is you're going to bring up the decimal, as you see here. Just bring that right on up. Next step is to divide. The third step is to multiply. The fourth step is to subtract. And the fifth step is to bring down and repeat the process. When you're dividing decimals, you're going to repeat the process until you get 0 as a remainder, because you shouldn't have any remainders when you're dividing decimals. So let's go ahead and take a look at the example that I have here. We have 2 and 87/100ths divided by 5. So first step I did was I brought up my decimal, and then I went ahead and divided. So I know that 5 can't go into 2, meaning I can't make a group of 5 out of 2 pieces, so that's 0. Next, I'm going to go ahead and look at how many times can 5 go into 28. So that would be 5 times. So I can go ahead and multiply 5 times 5 gives me 25. Now I'm going to go ahead and subtract, and that leaves me with 3. So my last step is bring down and repeat the process. So I brought down my 7. And now how many times does 5 go into 37? 7 whole times. So multiply again. That's 5 times 7 is 35. Then we can go ahead and subtract, and that leaves us with 2. Alright, so at this point, you would have noticed that, alright, I can't have a 2 as a remainder, so what you're going to have to do is you're going to add a 0 to the dividend, and you're going to keep doing that until you have a 0 remainder. So I brought down my 0 after I added it, and that left me with 20. So now 5 goes into 20 at least 4 times. And 5 times 4 is 20, which leaves us with 0. So now we can go ahead and stop. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at dividing a decimal by a decimal now. This one, you just have to do one more step. So when you're dividing a decimal by a decimal, you need to move the decimal in the divisor and make it a whole number. And whatever you do to the outside, you have to do to the inside. So you're going to do the same thing and move the decimal in the same number of places in the dividend. So for example, here we have 48.40 divided by 0.02. Whenever you have a problem written horizontally like this, your dividend will be the number on the inside, and your divisor is going to be that number on the outside. So we need to change our divisor to be a whole number. So in order for us to do that, we have to move our decimal to the right 2 places, and that'll leave us with 2. So since we did that to the divisor, we have to move the same number of places in our dividend. So that means I'm going to take 48.40 and I'm going to move the decimal 2 times, and that's going to change my number to 4,840. And then you can go ahead and divide. So just as it stated when you're dividing the decimal by a whole number, the same steps apply. You're going to go ahead and bring up the decimal, and then you're going to divide, multiply, subtract, bring down, and repeat that process over until you get a 0 remainder. So don't forget, when you're dividing a decimal by a decimal, move the decimal in the divisor and make it a whole number. Do the same to the number on the inside and move it that number of places in the dividend. 2, bring up the decimal, and 3, divide like normal. Don't forget that if you end up with the remainder, you need to add a 0 to the dividend until you have 0 remaining. And that's how you are to divide. a decimal by a decimal. So now let's go ahead and take a look at some examples that we can do for dividing. I'm going to leave up that anchor chart on the side so we can look back and reference which one we're going to have to use. Let's get started. Here's our first example. 306.25 divided by 49. So let's go ahead and start. Here we are going to be using the decimal divided by a whole number. So our first step is to bring up that decimal. And it's always very important that when you're dividing to make sure that you have everything neat. Leave a little bit of space in between each number. That way you know if you can stop dividing and you can see each place value. I like to tell my students to do this because it helps them keep track of where they are. So let's go ahead and get started. How many times can 49 go into 3? We know that it can't. So we're going to go ahead and I like to put an X there, or you could put a 0, whichever one you want to do. Okay, 49 can't go into 30, so same thing. You can put an X or a 0. How many times does 49 go into 306? So here, you guys are going to have to take a guess. Since this is a big number, that means we're going to look at numbers that are greater than probably 3 and 4. So let's go ahead and try out 49 times 6. So 9 times 6 is 54. And 6 times 4 is 24. Plus 5 is 29. That number is pretty close to 306. And if we multiplied 49 times 7, we'd probably get a number that is greater than 306. So we can go ahead and put 6 right there. So now we multiply that and we get 294. And we can go ahead and subtract. 6 take away 4 is 2. We can't do 0 take away 9, so that's going to become a 10 because we're going to borrow from this 3. And 10 take away 9 is 1. So our answer is 12. Then our last step is going to be to bring down. So we're going to bring down this 2. So now, how many times does 49 go into 122? Well, I'm going to say that we can go to a lower number because this is really close to 50. And we know that 50 times 2 equals 100. So let's try out 2. So 49 times 2. All right, 2 times 9 is 18. 2 times 4 is 8. Plus 1 is 9. So that's pretty close. Now, let's say if you wanted to test out 49 times 3. You can go ahead and test it out, but it might end up being bigger. So 3 times 9 is 27, and 3 times 4 is 12, plus 2 is 14. So do you see how 49 times 3 would be way too big? So our best option would be 2. So let's go ahead and subtract that from 122. So we can't do 2 take away 8, so that's going to become a 12. That's going to become a 1, and then we're going to have to borrow from here to make that a 0 and this an 11. So 12 take away 8 is 4. 11 take away 9 is going to be 2. And then we're going to go ahead and bring down that 5. So now we need to figure out how much or how many times can 49 go to 245. So we know that 49 times 6 gave us 294, so that's pretty close to 245. So let's try the number below it. Let's try out 49 times 5. 5 times 9 is 45. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 4 is 24. So, perfect. That equals to 45. So let's go ahead and put our 5 here in our last spot. And now 5 times 49 is 245. And now we can subtract, and that leaves us with our answer of 0. And now we can stop because we have a 0 remainder. So our answer to this problem is 6.25. And notice how neat my paper looks. This is exactly how you guys should be solving problems in your notebooks or on a separate sheet of paper. That way you can see it nice and clearly. All right, let's go ahead and do another example. All right, here's our next problem. We have 4.75 divided by 0.25. So in this equation, we're going to go ahead and use the method of dividing a decimal by a decimal. So the first step says that we need to move the decimal in the divisor and make it a whole number. So in order for us to do that, we need to move this decimal 2 places. 1, 2. So our number is now 25. So whatever you do to the outside, you need to make sure you do to the dividend. So let's go ahead and move that over. 1, 2. So here's our new placement of our decimal. And guys, don't forget, if you're doing this with pencil, erase the old decimal so that way you know where the new decimal is. And not to get confused with that. I like to put little arrows as well. And if you want to, go ahead and rewrite the problem. That way it looks a lot neater. So we have 25 on the outside as our divisor. And on the inside of the house, we're going to have 475. And let's go ahead and put our decimal point there. And then you follow the same steps. Bring up the decimal and begin dividing. How many times can 25 go into 4? It cannot. So how many times can 25 go into 47? I would say at least 1 time, because you should know that 25 times 2 equals to 50. Or you can look at it as 2 quarters equals to 50 cents. So 25 times 1, it's 25, and we're going to go ahead and subtract that. So 7 take away 5 is 2. 4 take away 2 is 2. And then our final step is bring down. And repeat the process. So how many times can 25 go into 225? So with that, you're going to need to do a guess and check. Again, since this is a little bit of a bigger number, that means we're going to go ahead and choose a higher number between 0 and 9 to multiply. So obviously we know we're not going to do 0 because 25 times 0 is 0. So choose a higher number. I would say let's go ahead and try out 25 times 8. 8 times 5 is 40. 8 times 2 is 16 plus 4 is 20. So that got us pretty close. So I think if we went up 1 more, we could get really close to 225. Because we're only going to be adding to 25 more. So let's see. So 9 times 5 is 45. And 9 times 2 is 18. Plus 4 is 22. So there we go. We found out that 25 can go into 225 at least 9 whole times. So subtract. And we get a 0 remainder, and that means we can stop. So the answer to our problem of 4.75 divided by 0.25 is going to equal to 19. And that's how you guys divide decimals, by a decimal. So make sure to use this video and or your anchor chart to help you when you're solving problems. Good luck!